Hi everyone. As Chloe said, my name is Melanie Penagos and I'm the project manager for the AI for Children project. Welcome and thank you so much for participating in our roundtable discussion on children's voices in AI. Last year, our project held global consultations with 245 adolescents from Brazil, Chile, South Africa, Sweden, and the United States to learn about their views and understanding of AI systems, which we will hear about today. Today, we also published a summary report on these consultations to document and share the views of the young people we spoke to. We heard about what excites them about AI, what worries them, and what they would like to learn more about. And here on the screen, you can see a link to download the report. So we hope you will check that out today. And to provide a bit of context, these workshops fed into the development of a policy guidance on AI for children, which we launched last September with the aims to raise awareness of children's rights and provide recommendations for the development of child-centered AI, primarily for governments and businesses. And we found that there was an urgent need for this type of guidance after we conducted a review of national AI strategies and found that overall there were very few mentions of children or their needs, despite the fact that we know that children require special protections and that they have unique and distinct rights. And research shows how children are being impacted by AI technologies, which will continue to have a profound effect on their lives now and in the future. So with the generous support of the Government of Finland, we held 5 regional consultations with 200 digital and children's rights experts, as well as 9 consultations with nearly 250 adolescents from around the world to provide input into the development of this guidance. And so with this in mind, our discussion today will include a description of the methodology for the consultations and discuss some high-level observations from our facilitators, as well as some forward-looking engagement strategies to include children's voices in the development of AI systems and policies. And we have 3 excellent panelists who will be speaking in a moment. First, we have Valentina Munoz, who is a youth activist and founder of Amuji Chile, an initiative for the empowerment of girls in ICT and coding. She was an active participant in one of our virtual consultations. And we also have with us Dr. Shafika Isaacs, an associate professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg. Shafika is also the author of our recent report on adolescent perspectives on AI. And we have Professor Lionel Brossi, who is the director of the AI and Society Hub at the Universidad de Chile, and is a member of Youth and Media at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. And he facilitated our virtual consultations. And lastly, we have Kate Pavlicek from UNICEF, who will serve as our moderator today. But before we begin the roundtable discussion, Emilia Mustajärvi will say a few words on behalf of Finland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Emilia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Government of Finland, welcome to this webinar discussion on children's voices in artificial intelligence. First of all, let me start by thanking UNICEF and the AI for Children project team for your great work and efforts in developing the policy guidance to promote children's rights in the age of AI. UNICEF is a key partner for Finland in our efforts to leverage innovation and technology for sustainable development and for the benefit of all. The guidance is now being piloted, and Finnish users are also taking part in testing and piloting the guidance. Finland is very proud to have supported and worked together with UNICEF in this process, and we wish for a maximum use of the guidelines once they are ready. Today, the world is increasingly driven by new technologies, and AI can open us a new world of opportunities and become a positive transformative force. But it can also deepen the digital divides. Many children today, they receive their first smart device or their first social media account at a very early age. And by the age of 18, tons of their personal data and information is being collected and used. And this digital footprint will be following them to their adulthood. Algorithms, they also affect children's daily life and can shape their worldview by informing their choices or increasingly making the choices for them. For all the risks and ethics to consider, the AI will also have a huge potential to do good, from improving learning to problem solving and critical thinking. And that's why it is our responsibility to protect the children and make them AI ready for the future by empowering them with the best and right tools we have. Today we will hear about the consultations UNICEF hosted with adolescents around the world and the outcomes that will lead the way forward. I'm very keen to hear what children have to say about growing up surrounded by AI and to learn how we can better engage them in services, in regulation and the development of AI. It is time to expand our thinking from the future of AI to the future of next generations of AI and what AI has to learn from children. I wish you all very interesting discussions. And next we will see a short video on the consultations. Thank you very much.
I think artificial intelligence is giving machines human qualities.
Ela, tipo, igual o Google Assistente, ele me lembra de acordar todo dia para ir para a escola.
A robot, automatic cars.
Det är bra för just nu för att hålla folk säkra så de inte blir riktigt lika sjuka när kurvan plattar ut dem.
Do we count social media? No. Actually, I don't know.
Artificial intelligence captures our imagination with its promise to transform our lives. But do we know enough about it? To understand what children think about AI, UNICEF set up 9 workshops around the world. Some were face-to-face, while the arrival of COVID-19 pushed others online. The workshops were an opportunity for adolescents to engage with experts, finding out more about AI in their daily lives, and share how they feel future policy and legislation should protect the rights of children.
Och jag ser mest på AI som något positivt.
It's very exciting to think that I can actually speak to something that doesn't have human qualities but understands.
A artificial ela já está ajudando muitas pessoas no mundo.
I think anything could go wrong with AI.
Men också att folk kan få tag i det och då kan det användas mot det på flera sätt.
Cars that drive themselves. If it's driving itself and I crash, who's gonna be to blame for that? So yeah.
It is very important for children to learn and understand AI technologies because these kind of technologies are embedded in their daily life, in their daily digital practices. Sometimes we think that AI is something that it's a bit abstract, a bit far away from children's daily practices, but actually what they most use is social networks and digital platforms in general that have algorithms behind them.
My experience with hosting these workshops with UNICEF is that they're very beneficial for children. Definitely, it empowers them around online safety and really trains them to be active digital citizens who know how to use the internet responsibly. So we need to equip them. And part of equipping them is also hearing what they have to say. But when we talk about participation and active participation is really hearing what children have to say about important issues that affect them and then listening and then creating a guide that can then be made available, shared with policymakers and government officials to say, this is what children are saying, please take them seriously, in order to be able then to have inclusive kind of technology that is available and accessible to everyone, including children.
It's really important to hear not only the voices of children and young people, but to hear what they propose, to really include them in all the educational politics, government politics, in order to make this system more secure.
While the workshops provided an opportunity for the children to look towards the future of AI, it also revealed certain gaps in their knowledge and a hunger to fill them.
E muitos dos meus amigos não sabem o que é inteligência artificial. Acho que a gente tem que saber, porque isso está cada vez mais inserido no nosso dia a dia.
Artificial intelligence could provide us with solutions to humanitarian problems because they have a lot of information about the world.
What needs to happen to protect children in the digital world is that government and policymakers should be responsible because they need to ensure that they understand what the product is and they need to also ensure that it's being used safely.
Hi, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Kate Pawelczyk. As you heard earlier, I'm a communications specialist with UNICEF in New York, and I was one of the designers of the methodology for the workshops. And I hope you really enjoyed the video and that it gave you just a little bit of a taste of how our workshops looked and what some of the really interesting things that the participants said and thought about artificial intelligence. So I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity today to moderate a conversation that will go into a little bit more depth about the workshops and give you some insight into what we heard and what we learned through the process. I'm joined by the three wonderful panelists that you already met a little bit earlier, and you'll get to know better through our conversation. And so I want to jump right in because we don't have a huge amount of time and to talk a little bit more about the workshops. And just to give you a little bit of context, one of the challenges that we recognized when we set out to do these workshops was that AI is, as we know, a very complex, pretty technical topic and not something that's necessarily easy to discuss for anybody. So we really came up with a methodology that was designed to address this. We made sure that we started off each workshop with looking at digital technology and digital use more broadly, and then we narrowed in on artificial intelligence. We also made a decision to include kind of an educational component within the workshops that would give participants some basic knowledge about artificial intelligence and how it works, which could then help inform their discussions and deliberations. So it was a wonderful learning experience, and you'll hear a little bit more about it. I first wanted to turn to Valentina, who, as you heard, was one of the participants in the workshop in Chile, and she's also done some amazing things she'll tell you about. Valentina, could you tell us a little bit what it felt like to be in the workshop and how you experienced it, what you think worked well?
Thank you very much, Kate. Do I hear me well? Yes? Great. Well,
Sounds great.
as Melanie just said before, my name is Valentina. I'm 18 years old, and I participated on UNICEF workshop as a feminist youth activist and a defensor of digital rights. And of course, it was a very enriching experience, both to participate in the workshop and also to learn about the process of construction of the workshop and its methodology. I think the workshop had a successful call for young people to participate at a national level, and it was an important milestone in terms of child and youth participation. As saying, didn't expect us to see us here, but here we are, and this is our contributions. I believe that there is no better way to overthrow adult tantrums than by showing that we have a voice and that we don't have to ask permission to use it. Also, the UNICEF workshop has a very inspiring experience for me. Later on, I decided to design a workshop only for girls and teenager girls, together with the Association of Young Women for Ideas, that is AMUJI, due to its Spanish initials, where I am a co-founder and the actual president. We made this with the intention of seeing this AI policy from a gender equality perspective. And the UNICEF policy guidance on AI for children was a really important resource for us, and we use it as a basis for the construction of our workshop, which was a very successful event too. And I was even recognized by the Science Ministry as the youngest programmer to contribute on the construction of the AI policy in Chile, and the youngest programmer to call for a workshop. with this, I had the opportunity to participate in the Policy Ambassador Council, and it was impressive to hear from the Science Ministry itself the impact that this two youth workshop had generated. The UNICEF workshop and the one I have designed and created from Memuhi. Especially the last one that we carry out together, Amuhi and UNICEF, in which we were the only workshop at the national level to convince children and teenagers for the final review of the policy, of the draft policy, I mean. So yeah, it was very inspiring to see how UNICEF workshop went, and it was like, why can't we do another one? So yeah, it was really great.
Valentina, thank you so much. I think there can be no greater reward for the work that we do than knowing that it has inspired young people and inspired them to take further action. And the work you've done is really impressive. And I love what you said about kind of overthrowing adult centrism. And I think that's something we really try to do and make sure that children and young people are at the table from the beginning and considered from the beginning, not an afterthought. So yes, I actually now wanted to also bring in Lionel and still stay focused on the Chile workshop. And I wanted to ask both of you, what stood out from you? What did you learn? What were some of the results that really resonated with you? Were there things you were surprised by, perhaps? So Lionel, if I can ask you first.
Hi, Kate. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kate, for this great question. Regarding this, I think, well, absolutely, yes, we were totally amazed by the interest that the field of artificial intelligence generates among children and youth, especially young girls. We could see Valentina. There were very insightful debates that I think in the case of Chile exceeded the technical aspects of AI, because participants in Chile were debating issues such as, or questions such as, what is intelligence? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be human? So the workshop was divided into three different sections. And in the first one, I think that the ethical, social aspects and even philosophical aspects of artificial intelligence were of a central interest and concern by participants. But moving to the children's rights arena, we could also see that there were some tensions or difference maybe in relation to the awareness some participants had regarding data privacy and safety risks that may be posed by AI systems, versus the fact that some of them expressed their data could be used for their own benefit, like the development of new applications that match their desires or interests, the personalization of educational pathways, and also more efficient or more human-like chatbots or voice assistants. So I think this also shows that children have different level of awareness regarding the protection of their personal data, information, and safety in the context of AI. So as an example, some of the younger participants, especially the youngest boys, showed a certain kind of, I will say, resignation in relation to handing over their personal data, since they expressed that from a very early age, they are handing over their information on internet to use applications, to register in social networks, or to play games. So I think that as a lesson out of it, I will say that when we think and develop policies to protect children's rights in the AI era, or in any field actually, we have to stop thinking that children are a homogeneous group, because elements such as age, gender, the context where they live, the possibilities that they have to for digital literacy where AI is embedded, build up distinct perceptions and levels of awareness. So definitely this was one of the key aspects that I would like to highlight, and we have to take this really seriously. Thank you, Kate.
Sorry, unmuting them. It was a little bit slow, but really important point, Lionel. I think, as you said, in all areas of working with children and young people, they're not a homogenous group. And, that example that you gave, I think, really underscores that here. Valentina, were there things that, your peers said that you heard during the workshop that really stood out to you? We'd love to hear about them.
Thank you very much, Kate. Well, just like Leo, I was also impressed by the great interest of girls who had participated in the workshop in Chile, but in a good way. I mean, as a feminist, for me, it was obviously that involving girls was indispensable, but with the big gender gap that exists in Chile and how soon it starts, I thought it would be more difficult to combine them. Also, I think for young participants, it is really important to make that AI discussion an ethical discussion. I could see in other experiences that some ambassadors of the AI policy were quite more interested in technical aspects of AI, which it's important. It's fantastic to see it from this way, but we need to explore also other aspects of these technologies at all in the complete form. And during the workshops, we had the chance to discuss ethical concerns, as Leo said, and the human rights aspects of AI. And I think it is crucial to learn and talk about it. Also for this instance, young participants who were able to participate in the AI policy roundtables in Chile were especially worried about making this an inclusive and diverse policy, including children, elder, people who do not have access or to internet or digital resources. And well, Chile really has a big digital gap, and I think it was great to implement this workshop as an introduction to digital and AI rights. It was a really big introduction to understand why we need it. And it was also really empowering to see how youth is not afraid of not knowing much about AI, but still participating in the workshop. I really have experience in the field of AI, but there were a lot of children and teenagers that came to the workshop saying like, yeah, I don't know anything about AI, but I came here to learn and I think I could contribute. And that was the mood, like, yeah, we were there to learn together. And youth has that special power in there. I noticed that they really want to be protagonists. And sorry, and well, it was a great way to start to understand that we need to be protagonists of this change, that we don't have to be afraid of not knowing, because we don't know about a lot of things. It's just that probably I know something that the person at the other side just know, and we have different knowledge. We have to be in these dialogues to complement them. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much. And that's really the kind of mood or feeling we wanted to create in the workshops, to make everybody, even those who didn't know much about AI, feel like it was a safe space to share their views, and that everybody's views were welcome and important. And I think hearing from both of you, the things you said, really resonate with me. I co-facilitated both the pilot workshop in New York as well as the workshop in Johannesburg, and a lot of this stood out as well. I loved seeing the excitement on young people's faces when we were talking about machine learning, and I was kind of doing my best to explain how it works. But as you said, Valentina, there's the technical aspect, which is important, but there's also this aspect of the ethics and the human rights, which is, again, what we try to combine in the workshop. Now, Shafika, I wanted to turn to you. You were, alas, and not part of the workshops directly last year, but you've had the chance to review the findings and the reports from all the workshops, which is a really interesting experience. So I really wanted to hear from you. What are some of the key insights that really stood out to you as you were reading the reports, watching some of the footage from these very, very diverse settings? Please share those with us.
Sure. Thank you, Kate, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone attending the webinar. I see there's some of my colleagues in attendance, so shout out to all of them. I am speaking from Johannesburg, and the reports that I reviewed were from workshops in Johannesburg, as Kate said, in Chile, across the country, in fact, in Chile, in Sao Paulo, in New York, and in Umeå in Sweden. And so it covered something like 250 young people between the ages of 13 and 19 across the 5 countries. And, this morning, Kate, I woke up and grabbing my phone, I found a post on Instagram that said something like, young people living in resource-limited regions have been almost entirely excluded from meaningful participation in pandemic-related research and associated knowledge mobilization initiatives. And I let that sink in for a minute. Because as I revisited the fact that there are 1.2 billion young people between the ages of 15 and 24 in the world, and in the region where I'm located in sub-Saharan Africa, 200 million people between the ages of 15 and 24, making it the largest generation in the region. I think it is in that context that we need to see the relevance of UNICEF hosting this child youth consultations with 250 young people from across the world. Because there's a very clear, loud message that came out for me, just reading the reports, listening also to Valentina today, that struck me very strongly, was that there was, across all the workshops, a profound sense of agency amongst all the youth. There's a sense that they have the right to an opinion, they have the right to decision-making, they have views that matter, they can be smart, they can talk and question, not just on technical aspects, but also on the socio-political, cultural issues within which the technologies, including AI, are embedded. Some very strong views were articulated, a profound sense of social agency as well as collective agency was articulated across almost all workshops. And I think that is very encouraging and enlightening in the context also of there not being a culture of engagement with young people and children as if they have agency. And so therefore reiterating the point that Valentina made, that many of these systems, our own systems, are adult-centric. And there was a clear message there from all of the youth about their capabilities that came out very strongly, and almost an appeal for an acknowledgement and recognition of those capabilities in and of themselves. And I think that came across very, very strongly. What also struck me was the fact that coming from a region where there's deep-seated inequality, but also digital inequality. So I was particularly interested to also look at how young people who participated in these workshops, who were less exposed to digital technologies and AI. And what was fascinating is that even young people from places like Manaus in Brazil and Sao Paulo, and including in Chile, from what I've read, who are less exposed to digital technologies and AI, were also able to participate meaningfully. They also had views. They could also indicate and imagine the implications for them. And I think that is quite telling as well. And I think to capture it all, I had the privilege of then also engaging with all the facilitators, including Lionel, as well as people who were really behind the organization, like yourself, Kate, Steve Foslo, and a number of colleagues in UNICEF. And I was quite taken by the fact that almost everybody spoke with surprise and wonder, especially the adults, spoke with surprise and wonder and sometimes sheer delight at what they discovered in terms of some young people being able to articulate fairly sophisticated and complex insights on the technical aspects of AI, as well as the socio-cultural and political dimensions of AI, like Valentina has actually shown us. And it again shows that there's quite considerable work that we need to do in terms of shifting the narrative around children's rights, children's capabilities to articulate their voices, acknowledge them, recognize them for that, and to create spaces for them to do that. And I think this workshop has certainly showed that for something as complex as artificial intelligence, it is entirely possible for us to ensure that there are strong voices by young people that can be heard within these contexts.
Thanks so much, Shavika. You know, just thinking back to my experience in Johannesburg and even a little bit in New York, one of the things that I think I took away is that, you know, we also need to do more work with children and young people on kind of reimagining what this future, near future with, you know, that's very powered by AI looks like. I was particularly struck when we were talking about the use of AI in the healthcare field. There were quite a few responses that kind of said, well, you know, will this put nurses or doctors out of work if they're no longer kind of doing certain tasks that now AI can do? And we try to have a conversation about, you know, well, if a doctor or a nurse is not spending loads of time in paperwork, what could they be doing? How would their job change? And it was a really fascinating conversation. In New York, we heard quite a bit about kind of, you know, if we have all this AI, people will become maybe lazier or things like that. So I think there's also this kind of space to really think about how do we together imagine a more positive world that's powered by AI. Now, since I've drifted onto the topic of health, the first workshops we did, the majority of them took place before COVID was declared a global pandemic. And in the case of Chile, we actually had to adapt the methodology to do a fully online workshop, which we could probably have an entire webinar dedicated to. But Lionel, you were really the champion of this. And so, you know, could you tell us a little bit about that process specifically and what you learned from it?
Thank you, Kate. Well, yes, it was quite a challenge. As you all know, well, we were trying first to do face-to-face workshops, but then the pandemic came and we had to convert and translate all the methodology, of course, with the support from Kate, who was like one of the main brains designing these workshops, and transform it into an online experience. But I will say that this experience allowed much more children and youth from around the country to participate, because we had children from Tierra del Fuego to Arica in the north of the country, from rural and urban areas. So this was a really great thing. And then I was thinking that even though, as Valentina rightly said, in Chile there is still a big gap in terms of accessibility, connectivity, the equipments that are available to youth, the participants manage somehow to actively participate and engage in the different stages of the workshops. Because sometimes, for instance, the connections, it was cut and they came back again in the middle of the workshop, or they couldn't use the camera, but they were using actively the chat feature or the audio feature. So there was always a way to engage young people, but also they were really proactive in participating. The other thing that was amazing, and I think you, Kate, just mentioned a bit, the idea of including deep listening methodology, but also an educative component or training component on the workshops was really appreciated by participants. In general, they say that sometimes in schools they are not really heard, and they love the idea of we were debating with them and hearing their ideas. And another good thing was like we decided to train senior journalist students or women to be the facilitators of the workshops. And the fact that they were young students helped to create an atmosphere of confidence with participants. Another interesting thing of this particular experience in Chile was that we invited an engineer. She's an engineer working on AI and data science. And she was able to answer all the technical questions that were really kind of difficult questions, like, I don't know, if a brain could be replicated in the future with neural networks, or how an algorithm takes decisions. So the idea of including an engineer of AI in the workshop was as well really well received. It kept a lot of attention. Actually, we have a very short timing, and as they were really interested, we kept moving forward and taking more time from the workshop, but the conversation were really interesting. So in terms of what we could learn from the process in general, and in honor to the time, I will maybe say 3 takeaways. One was the importance that was given to the role of parents in protecting children and youth against any potential risk posed by AI. They expressed that AI should always be supervised by humans, parents, or tutors. However, they mentioned this rarely happens to them. What does happen is that in the face of lack of support from adults, siblings and peers are now playing a critical role in educating and warning younger children against any potential risks. I'm thinking about the book of Urs Gasser and John Parsley, The Connected Parents, that can give us really good insights on how to work with parents in supporting children in their digital life, and of course in the AI ecosystems. The second is the access to their personal information, as I mentioned before, was a transversal concern for children and youth. The question of, for instance, who and for what purposes the information is used seems to be a central worry, concern for the children. But the thing is, this doesn't necessarily correlates with the specific idea of taking some actions to protect themselves, or knowing, for instance, how to read the terms and conditions, or configuring the safety and privacy settings in social networks or applications. So there is this awareness, but still a lack of literacy to protect themselves. So finally, I think it will be interesting just to read a quote from one of the participants that gives a positive look on how AI is also perceived in a positive way by children and young people. And she said, what excites me is the fact that through artificial intelligence, we can create solutions to many problems of today's world, and also to facilitate our existence. Things can be easier and faster. Artificial intelligence can be implemented in various ways, but I know that if it's used for good purposes, it can be a contribution for children and humanity. This was also very interesting to me, because in a workshop that it's kind of focused as well on the risks and potential harms that AI could pose against children's rights, always appear many positive things regarding the evolution or the future of artificial intelligence. And I think this is a good thing that we have to highlight from the Chilean workshops. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Lionel. And it's great to hear that, because again, that was one of the kind of, when we set out to do this, one of the challenges we perceived was, how do we balance the opportunities and the challenges, because we didn't want to create a workshop that was, you know, kind of overly positive and didn't consider any of the risks and challenges. At the same time, we didn't want to kind of scare everybody and make them worried about the future, because there are ways, you know, where this technology can be applied positively. So kudos again to you and your team for creating such a rich and empowering experience for young people. So we're coming towards my last question. I've already seen we have some questions coming through from our attendees. Thank you so much. We are taking note of them, but just encouraging everyone else, please do get your questions in now, and we'll have some time after this segment to discuss these. But basically now, as we come towards the end of this part of the discussion, I wanted to take a broader view. One of the things that I heard from young people in a number of the workshops was, you guys need to do this with other schools or with other places. You need to put this online. You know, our friends don't know about any of this. And to me, it really kind of, raised this issue of how do we reach more young people, more children and young people, and how do we educate and engage them about, the impact of AI on their rights potentially, but also on kind of the development of policies and programs. So this is a question I want to pose to each of you, and to hear based on your expertise on how we can do this, because it's great to do a workshop where we've reached 250 young people, but of course, as Shavika pointed out, there are literally more than 1 billion children and young people in the world. So I think we need to think of ways about how do we, make sure that everybody has this knowledge and awareness. So Valentina, I'd like to turn to you first.
Thanks, Kate. Well, I think that there is a complete system that encourages little participation of youth in these matters, starting from the adult-centric idea that children should not have an opinion, or when they say there are adult issues in which young people should not get involved. We have all grown up under this dynamic that your value as an individual citizen begins when you reach the majority of age. And I believe that everything starts much before. It is not often promoted that youth should actively participate in society, in our community. But sometimes participation is also deprived as a right. We need to start changing that from the grassroots, from the schools, from the homes. And I think it will be hard and long, although not impossible. But I would like to highlight the fact that I believe these initiatives, such as the UNICEF workshops, and also the one I have convocated by myself to create spaces specifically for children and adolescents, attract a lot of participation because they make young people feel like an important part of the process, because there is a space that is specially created for them. I believe that something that remains to be worked on is the adult-centered obstacles and bureaucracy that hinder youth from the possibilities of real participation. I mean, children and adolescents are not simply mere users or beneficiaries of adults' initiatives. We have to be managers, creators. We have the chance of being part of the leading teams and also having the opportunities and resources to create our own initiatives. As youth, we need to get involved in AI, learn and share that knowledge with our peers, because only in this way it will stop being perceived as an alien or external subject. It is not necessary to be a programmer to understand artificial intelligence, but the greater the diversity of people who program artificial intelligence, the more diverse and inclusive AI will be. This is not a problem of the future. It is happening today. It is in our cell phone, in our hands right here. And it is today when we need to start acting. Artificial intelligence involves a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. We are like building a whole new space, and we need to be respectful to our rights and diversity, and for that we must be active agents of it. In each of us there is the possibility of creating, disseminating, and using technologies that improve our quality of life and our interaction as society. So I think that we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And with this, our AI will learn from that. That's how it works.
Thank you, Valentina. I mean, I kind of wanted to clap or like cheer, you know, because you said so many things that I really believe in and that I know many others do. But, you know, I actually, you know, I can't say anything better than what you just did. So thank you for making
Thank you
those
very
really
much.
important points. And Shafika, hard act to follow, but would love to hear your perspectives on how we more broadly engage and educate children and young people about AI.
So thank you, Kate. I think I'm going to be very brief because there's some excellent questions to that effect also in the chat that I see. But the good news is that I've had the privilege also of being involved with the UNICEF team and engaging with the facilitators of the workshops on the production of another publication, a living document, if you like, that focuses on the kinds of strategies, techniques, and formats that we can use to worldwide to encourage and engage, especially adolescents and children, in policy and in practice on the critical issues on AI. And I think that that's excellent. And in just working on both reviewing the reports as well as this document on the methodologies and formats, what strikes me is, again, the point that Valentina made is that to see and to frame children and young people as policymakers too. And that it's not people who just influence policy, but they can also make policy, like Valentina sitting on the committee that is in fact writing policy. And in the same way, we've had similar examples in South Africa where there are advocacy and activist strategies that have actually worked well in the digital space, where NGOs have in fact mobilized young children to articulate their voices, writing submissions to committees in governments. And what struck us all very strongly throughout the workshops is the fact that the youth saw government and companies and scientists, computer scientists, as the key people to be lobbying. They saw the important role of engaging with their parents through intergenerational learning, if you like, in the way Leonel has explained. That is also part of the kinds of strategies that have to be engaged with. At my university, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Marwala, in fact produced a book with two other professors on Professor Nikki Robertson, a professor from a Brazilian university, actually about AI for children. It's called My First AI Book, also as part of a reading campaign, but to make people aware, at the young children aware at a very young age about AI as well, as another technique. And a number of techniques are articulated in that book, but the one that also struck me in terms of what the youth have recommended is the fact that we need to also involve children in the design of responsible, child-centered, artificially intelligent platforms and chatbots. And there are quite a number of examples that were given in that respect, as well as using these large-scale platforms. For example, UNICEF has in fact developed its U-Report, which is a free, large-scale, multilingual, global platform with chatbot functionality that has in fact enabled millions of young people and communities to engage meaningfully on very critical issues such as the COVID pandemic. And these are the kinds of platforms that I think emerged quite strongly in many of the suggestions that were made by the youth, by the facilitators, that we can indeed employ to ensure that the world does become, as it becomes an increasingly AI world, that it becomes child-friendly, child-centered, and acts in the interest of the promotion of equality and for the best interest of humanity. And I think these suggestions make that entirely possible, that imagination. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, again, lots of really great points. And I think when we get to the Q&A, we can pick up on some of these as well and go a little bit deeper. Lionel, last but not least, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Kate. Well, maybe I'm going to the basics because I think educational policies must go, and especially on AI, in the direction to generate first the conditions, and especially in the traditionally marginalized communities of connectivity, infrastructure, literacy, to reduce or eradicate the gaps that still persist in order to, for instance, promoting learning 21st century skills with a focus not only on children, but as we said, in parents also, and educators. And this is another important thing, making not only formal learning spaces, physical or virtual, but informal, that are freely available to children and youth. I think this is very important, especially in the context of the pandemic, where many young people are leaving their schools, are not registering again in 2025 to the schools, and there should be possibilities to keep advancing in education through at least informal learning spaces that are really important as well. Then create the conditions to generate lifelong learning opportunities that goes in parallel with the evolution of these technologies. And if we think of the interdisciplinary nature of AI, we need to adapt a whole government approach, not only like a specific area of the government that happens very often here in Latin America, that it's talking about these issues, but with intersectoral and multi-stakeholder approaches to create these educational strategies and also to advance in the planning and governance of AI and education and children's rights, of course. But in order to better understand this intersection of AI and children's rights, as Valentina rightly said, we need not only to understand youth perspectives and ideas, but to create the conditions for children and youth to be the protagonists and also decision makers. So after the workshops in Chile, we met again with some brilliant young participants. Among them was Valentina. And one of the ideas that emerged was to create an autonomous youth board to join efforts in the contributions to the Chilean AI national policies, where youth themselves can decide how to advance with the support of experts and mentors, but creating spaces where they themselves can decide what will be the best dynamics and even methodologies of work in order to advance together. This is, of course, not exempt from challenges, but I do think this is the direction we have to take. We can see the work of the Youth and Media team at Bergman Klein Center that has been working on creating this kind of youth autonomous and self-creative spaces. And we should take a look on these really good ideas that can help us to create better policies.
Thank you so much, Lionel. I think there was actually a question kind of asking about, to those points. So I hope we have maybe at least started to answer that one, because I think there's so many possibilities. We would kind of need to prioritize, and of course resources are limited, but at the same time we have, there's over 80 of us here today. We represent different sectors, different organizations, and I think there's so much potential for things that we could be doing, and we have some very clear suggestions and experiences now to inform this going forward. So I wanted to thank the panelists for this part of the discussion. So much food for thought that I hope everybody will walk away with. But we also have some really fascinating and some very tough questions from our attendees, which we will now focus on for, I think, about the next 20 or so minutes. So let's get right into that. And Lionel, I think I will direct the first question to you. And it focuses on how do we engage with younger children, specifically through early childhood education, and make sure that their rights concerning information gathering about them are met. We focus very much more on adolescents and youth in this conversation today, but I'd love to hear your perspectives on that.
Thank you, Kate, for this interesting question. I think that especially in this case, we need to work together with mentors, with adults, with teachers, with leaders of schools and leaders of informal educational spaces to engage younger children in these matters. I can give maybe an example. A few years ago, with the network Conectados al Sur, we did some workshops on digital citizenship, but also there was a part in the workshop that we were exploring AI issues. And we did it with, it's called SECREA, which is a Centers for Creation for Children in Chile. And in this case, we joined effort with this program from the government to engage, and they help us to do the promotion of this initiative and convocate different children that generally have a lot of difficulties to go to formal school, or children that have quit schools for different social structural or social economical reasons. But if we look and if we do a joint effort, as I previously said, like with a multi-stakeholder approach, like a private companies can help us as well to implement this kind of initiatives. I think we have spaces, even if we don't have the conditions, the proper conditions to do this, we have still spaces to engage younger children. And for instance, not having internet connection is not necessarily an impediment to do this kind of activities. We had a lot of experiences in schools that even didn't have like proper floor and not at all computers or connectivity, but we went with papers, markers, and post-its, and we did a lot of different dynamics to talk about these topics. And connecting with this, it's also important. That's why I was insisting during the whole webinar that we have to create the conditions of connectivity, literacy, and access and equipment, because one thing is to give the tools or to give the education and digital literacy on AI and children's rights, but on the other hand, are the possibilities that children have to apply the things that they learn, or to apply them using technologies, because not all the children has this opportunity. So first is creating the conditions, but if we don't have these conditions, there are always ways to do joint efforts to keep advancing in this arena. Of course, and maybe just to finish, to mention the ethical aspects of working with children and youth. It's really challenging, and especially in these pandemic times when we have to use digital tools to do all these kind of activities. So we have to be really careful in training the facilitators in ethical aspects of how we should deliver a workshop with children and young people, and also be really, really careful with working together with ethical committees regarding all aspects of these kinds of activities. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Lionel. And yes, that was not something we mentioned in detail, but that was a huge component of this work, and inherently challenging in the online space, because you know, some of the tools to, for example, make sure that a Zoom meeting is safe, also perhaps open up data collection and things like that. So that was something we spent a lot of time discussing and getting expert advice on, particularly as we moved into the online space. So the next question I wanted to move into concerns parents, and we heard quite a lot in the different workshops about the role of parents, that you know, children would like their parents to be more involved, or that they believe parents have a role to play. But I wanted to ask all of you, but starting with Valentina, do you feel that there is enough support for parents to then support their children, both in awareness, but also then actually supporting their children to participate in these processes of like policy development and all of that.
Thank you, Kate. Sadly, I don't think there is a really good policy about this. At least from the AI policy in Chile, artificial intelligence is treated merely as an academic subject, as if you could only learn AI in college, or as if you could only develop AI by having a degree. And it does not deal into the education of society in general. I mean, people outside the university school system, such as children, parents, or elder. I believe that in this sense, the role of youth as digital natives, it is really important to lead the fight for digital and AI rights, because now we have a lot of parents who, of course, they want to teach these topics to their children, but where are the resources? I think it is really difficult to them to find them. And today, a child takes a cell phone and learns to use it without us even teaching him. So maybe that is a great opportunity for digital native generations to educate our parents, our families, our peers. I think that is the way from now until the public politics will be really that really works in that case, that has a really good focus on children and young people, by understanding that we need to learn this from now, and maybe we in the future we don't want to get in the university, and that's okay, but we don't have to be like, if you don't get in the university, you will not know about AI, because like elder people, they are the most that will not get in the university. How will that people learn about AI? I think we have to see this topic as an education for everyone, because it's not a new issue, but it is now where it is starting to talk about it, and we need to see it as this: how are we going to educate everyone? And I think that in that point, the IA policy, almost in Chile, is deficient.
Thank you, Valentina. I think a really important point, that to kind of create that protective and safe environment for children, we need to be thinking, of course, much more broadly about the communities and the families and spaces that children spend most of their time in. Shafika, I wanted to ask your perspectives on this, because you had mentioned a kind of intergenerational learning and exchange. So any thoughts you have on that, or experiences from other topics? Because of course, you know, I think we face this challenge kind of every time there's either new technologies or new issues that happen and present challenges in society. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yes, thank you, Kate. I think what I found fascinating is that a lot of the youth in the workshops gave examples where they were open to having their parents have access to their accounts and follow them on Instagram, etc., and are wanting to have their parents quite engaged, which was quite interesting, I thought. And I think the reality is that there are spaces outside of the technologies and AI space in education, for example, in the education sector, where we have examples of what it means to engage with parents optimally, because it's often quite a neglected stakeholder group. And so, for example, we have established bodies in schools, in education structures, such as school governing bodies where parents are located. We have parent associations which become spaces where parents can be engaged with, as have been the case in a number of other issues. And I think with AI, with the issues around children's digital rights and so on, also becomes topics that we can include in the engagement with parents in the structures where they are located, is certainly one thing that comes to mind. The other is what we've seen emerge under the COVID-19 pandemic, and remote learning, particularly within the home, where the home has become a pedagogic space and families have been engaged in learning. You know, parents have had to learn for the first time how to engage on Zoom, learn what their children are learning and so on. And we have some really good examples of sort of family-centered learning strategies in the home, in the communities that have actually mushroomed under the pandemic, which I certainly think are some of the strategies that we can certainly consider. The final thing is, in fact, having dedicated or establishing and creating dedicated digital platforms for parents, where they can engage as parents as well. Some of the youth made examples of, you know, lots of examples of having youth ambassadors and youth champions, make the case for young people and children. But the idea also having parent champions, people who are parents who can then lobby other parents, raise awareness, demonstrate what's possible in terms of protecting children through the eyes of parents, are certainly some of the examples that have emerged in the conversations that we've had.
Thank you, Shafika. And I'm kind of putting my communicator hat on and also thinking about like the potential to, you know, begin to explore some of these issues in popular media that reach much greater numbers of people, but in a way that isn't so science fiction focused. I think that was something we heard in the workshop a lot. A lot of people had, you know, a lot of knowledge or kind of experiences or ideas about AI from science fiction, which is obviously very exciting, but, you know, perhaps not in this case like the most helpful, let's say, for parents understanding what are the key issues now. So we just have a few minutes left, and I wanted to kind of pick this question and put it to all of you. We touched on a little bit about this, you know, that it came out in some of the workshops, and it certainly came out in the South Africa workshop. But the question is, adults look at AI and automation with skepticism and fear of job displacement because it's a relatively new phenomenon for most of us. You know, was this the attitude of the young people who were in the workshops, or did you find that there was less fear considering they were growing up in it? And you know, Shafika, maybe I'll start with you looking more broadly at the presentations, but then Lionel, I'd love to hear from you, and Valentina, you know, from the other workshops you've done as well. Are young people worried about this aspect of job losses and job automation? So Shafika, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Well, certainly across all the workshops, a number of concerns around the social implications of AI emerged quite strongly in varying ways. The issue of gender inequality, racism, and how that could be reinforced by AI, including the issue of job losses. It came across quite strongly on a number of occasions because children were also aware that their parents are at risk of losing their jobs, that livelihoods are at stake. And it was also raised in the context of how they could be finding jobs when they grow up. How they would be entering a labor market where there is increased automation and a decrease in labor intensity in the kinds of jobs that are being created. So there was acute awareness of that. In terms of the kinds of strategies around how to combat that, there was less emphasis on the job creation aspects coming from young people and more on the combating the inequality dimensions in terms of the social issues that they've uncovered. But what it did do is it opened up the conversations around how then do we ensure continuing and sustainable livelihoods in the face of there being significant job losses in the future. And it certainly raised opportunities to contemplate and imagine, could that be reframed? Could we find alternatives? And I think that in itself was perhaps a positive note to conclude on, because that was also how it came across in the workshops from my reading of the reports as well.
Thank you, Shafika. Lionel, anything you want to add on that?
Yes, maybe to add Shafika's comments, that I think we are in the same line. We had sometimes I think we have to always think of the situated context of the children when we are working together. And in the case of the generally traditionally marginalized communities of young people, we observed in the context of another regional project, Ablatam, that many young people, they don't think a lot in their futures in terms, we received many answers like, my parents, they will probably not be able to pay the university, so I never thought about what career I should be following, or because they are really worried about how to survive the day-to-day, like how can they even earn money to help their parents. We have been hearing a lot of things like this. So for me, it's very important to take into account the situated context where the children are. But regarding the methodologies or strategies, together with my colleague from the AI and Society Hub, Ana Maria Castillo, in the context of another project that it's the future ways of working in the digital economy, we did an activity with students from a school of migrants. 60% of the students were migrants. And we did like a storytelling workshop where they could imagine how will be the future of work to them. And they could use interactive tools because we did it in the laboratories of the university. And we thought that it was a very creative and nice way to approach these topics that for certain communities is difficult to think about, because they use their creativity, their imagination, and out of the storytellings that themselves generated, we could observe like what were the dreams and what were actually, what way they were thinking about the evolution of AI in the context of the future of work. So I think we need to create creative spaces for working with children, especially those of a younger age, and especially those who generally don't have access to these technologies.
Thank you so much, Lionel. And we're coming up on time. So Valentina, kind of any last reflections you have on this particular topic before we hand back to Melanie?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I agree with the things Shafika and Leo said, and I can say that on the workshops I participated, I feel it wasn't a really big deal for you, the loss of jobs. They saw it more like a transformation of jobs. They do understand that there are jobs that are going to disappear as we know them, but they were also very aware that those jobs will still exciting in other forms, and I felt like yeah, they thought AI was a strange topic, that it wasn't an important topic on their lives, like fighting to eat, to have the money of the end of the month. And but I felt like there will also hope on them. They saw in AI a lot of opportunities, especially in programming. I found out. I mean, they were really impressed with the fact that if you learn to program, you can work, and you don't have to have a degree to program. and you just have to have a computer or a phone. And they were like, with this in my hands, I could work. And yeah, that was the big topic. Not what will be the work of the future, but to have a work in the future.
Thank you so much, Valentina, and thank you to all three of you. I wish we had more time to keep talking. And Melanie, let me hand back to you for the closing remarks, so we can wrap up on time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. So if you would like to learn more about our project and get involved, a good place to start is our project website, which is listed here on this slide. You can learn about all of our upcoming events and latest reports through our newsletter. So we encourage you to sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already done so. And of course, you can reach out to us at this email address if you would like to collaborate with us on the project or share your experiences using the AI for Children policy guidance, which I will link to in the chat for your reference. We will be updating the guidance with feedback from our pilot testing, which is taking place right now, and with comments from our public consultation. So we'll be releasing version 2 of this later this year in conjunction with our Global Forum on AI for Children. We will be sure to share more details with you on this in the coming months. And lastly, to wrap up, a very big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights, and to all of you for joining us. We greatly appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to all of your questions, so please feel free to email us and let us know, and we can relay that to the panelist for you. Yeah, and we will be in touch soon, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again.